Hi, my name is Aubrey Kapusta. As I read the prompt, I thought of many examples where science differs from other answer-generating practices. The first one that came to mind is how science is very evidence-based. When looking for evidence, we have to make sure that it is verifiable. This means that it is observable and measurable by using our senses. When we make claims, we have to make sure that it is supported by data that we collected during an experiment, but also based off of the observations that were made before, during, and after the experimentation. On the other hand, math doesn't so much use evidence, but it uses more logical thinking. When people do math problems, they use their logic to eliminate what must not be true. An example would be using the rules of algebra to figure out a simple equation. There would only be one correct answer, while in science, there could be many variations of an answer. The second thing that came to mind is how science follows a very strict method. When they use this method, it is called the scientific method. The first thing you do is make an observation, which means to identify an event you like to understand. Second is to come up with a question. What testable, data-driven question can you ask about the event? Third is to form a hypothesis. Write a statement that could answer the question. The statement should be both testable and falsifiable. Fourth, test your hypothesis. Collect data and observations that help determine whether your hypothesis is accurate. Fifth, data analysis, which means graphs, computations, and our statistical tests that allow the scientist to determine patterns. Lastly, draw conclusions, which means to interpret your data and observations and attempt to support or refute your hypothesis. Also, one thing I want to point out is that in science, nothing can be proven, only supported. This means there is never one distinctive answer in science. On the other hand, let's take religion as an example of a subject where it doesn't need a step-by-step method/process. In theology, it is based off of your faith. What one person thinks may not be what another person thinks is the right thing. If there's a classroom with people of all different cultures and beliefs, there would most likely be arguments because people have their own say on what they think is right or wrong. The third thing that came to mind is how science is facts versus opinion-based subjects. People come up with conclusions based on what their experience was during the experiment. That would be an example for an opinion-based perspective of science. People reading information from a website or any informational paper would be considered a fact. There are certain things in science that are just facts that came from scientists in the past. They did experiments and proved questions that they had. On the other hand, let's take art as an example where it's just an opinion-based subject. In art, the artists use their personal feelings, opinions, and experiences to create their piece of work. They use their creativity to create an individual piece of work that they formulated in their minds. There are no facts behind art. Well, maybe if you're learning facts about art itself, but when you're creating your own work, there are no facts involved. Regarding scientific practices, there are limitations of the scientific method. For example, for a hypothesis to be scientific, it must be falsifiable. If you have an idea that is unfalsifiable, for example in pseudoscience, that can make the method not effective. Now, the role of ethics can restrict scientific practices. For example, there is a point of discovery where the evidence remains incomplete. Ethics assist in navigating difficult topics like the beginning of life and the use of biotechnology where science fails to provide moral standards. Moral standards that are directed towards scientific research and decision-making are referred to as ethics in science. Now, a very good example of this is the Nuremberg Code that established ethical standards for human experimentation post-World War II, emphasizing informed consent. Thank you for letting me have this opportunity to earn the scholarship.